The effacement of indigenous paper in the digitized corpus of Fray Bernardino de Sahagún, Mexico's first ethnographer. I'm very happy to be participating in this event, particularly because I'll be followed by two presenters who will introduce two very important digital editions of Mesoamerican works. The first of these is the Lienzo de Tlaxcala, being created by scholars at the Universidad Autónoma de Mexico. This collaborative project, like other ones, has brought works once accessible to only a very few to broad audiences. Now, these audiences have very easy access to the iconography and the texts of important corpuses. The second is the Florentine Codex Project, sponsored by the Getty Research Institute. This key source has been called an encyclopedia of Aztec life. It was created under the auspices of a Franciscan, Friar Bernardino de Sahagún, who collaborated with native intellectuals to produce the texts. Native artists also collaborated to produce the images. Already I found that the digital, multilingual Florentine Codex has been a boon to my classes and to my own research. The Florentine Codex, like other digital editions, follows out of and builds upon the work of libraries and archives to digitize their collections and put them online. The corpus of manuscript books associated with Sahagún is an indication of just how successful that effort has been. As few as 5 years ago, the Florentine Codex was accessible only in parts. The Spanish language text, edited by Ángel María Garibay, has been kept in publication by Editorial Perúa for decades, and an 1829 edition has been online for many years. But the Florentine is not just written in Spanish, and at least half the text was written in Nahuatl, the native language of central Mexico. To consult the Nahuatl text, one had to use the English Nahuatl translation by Charles Dibble and Arthur J. Anderson, which was published in 13 volumes from the late 1950s into the 1970s. But if you wanted to view the text in relation to the original illustrations, which the Getty edition makes possible, you were bound to be disappointed. The Dibble and Anderson text reproduced only line drawings set off in their own section, and these self-same drawings had been salvaged from a 1908 publication project, never completed. The page on the right from the Florentine shows us one of the images as it would have appeared on the page, and on the left is it is missing from the Dibble and Anderson. It's missing both context and color. Only the very fortunate had access to a rare facsimile edition published in 1980 by the Archivo General de la Nación in Mexico in 3 volumes. In their moment, these expensive facsimiles acquired by research libraries were instruments for bringing the knowledge they contained to much broader publics, but they could never have the reach of the digital editions. Now, each new iteration of an original thing, be it the facsimile or the digital edition, introduces fundamental changes in the ways that we can physically interact with the iteration. And these modes of interaction determine what questions we are bound to ask about the thing itself. The iteration also might preclude us from even thinking to ask other kinds of questions. So in this talk, I want to briefly address both the new avenues of research the digital edition opens for the art historian, and then, derived from recent discoveries on colonial manuscripts, what it potentially forecloses. Now, to see a fulsome example of the capacities of a digital edition, we need to look no further than the digital edition of the Florentine Codex. For the art historian, this edition repairs relationships between the image and text that was deemed of secondary importance by earlier editors of the text, and it restores to us the luminous color of the original, as on this page here. The ingenious search function also allows modern viewers to search the images as well as the words in the text. Viewers, for instance, might see visual correspondences that would have been difficult for the original creators to be aware of. For example, an image search for heart allows us to see the great variety of hearts and their contexts. And a text search for the term Toxcatl brings together a description of the way this pre-Hispanic festival was commemorated in Book 2, as above, or along with the traumatic events of the conquest, where the Spaniards under Alvarado ordered a massacre on the Feast of Toxcatl. Here it appears in Book 12. In its easy, almost profligate searchability, the digital edition omits the physical discipline that the book form imposes on its contents. For instance, to perform a search across the volumes for the Feast of Toxcatl with the physical book, we would be forced to put down one volume containing the part about the pre-Hispanic festivals, and then pick up a third book where we would find the importance of Toxcatl during the history of the conquest. But it strikes me that the distance established by the text between one set of events in one book and another in a different book may have been important to the Florentines' creators. Perhaps they wanted to keep the celebrations of their forebears separate from the calamities of the Spanish invasion. Thus, while the modern digital edition may help us to know the Florentine Codex in one way, it might actually distance us from the histories as its creators wanted them to be known. The Florentine Codex, as we know it, was drawn up in a fair copy in the Franciscan convent of Santiago Tlatelolco in Mexico City. About a decade earlier, Sahagún and his Nahuatl-speaking collaborators created another book, this one in Nahuatl with some Latin. It's a sermonario, a collection of sermons meant to be read for Nahuatl-speaking communities during the Mass. The volume was signed and dated by Sahagún on the first page, which allows us to know that it was finished in 1563, about a decade before the Florentine. Here is his signature on the page. It is accessible in a digitized version via Carly, an online database of manuscripts. This is not really an edition per se, in that it has none of the features like metadata searchability of the Getty digital Florentine. Nevertheless, it's allowed researchers easy accessibility to its text. For instance, a modern critical edition with translations of the Nahuatl into Spanish came out last year, and another edition with translation into English is about to be published. But what the digital edition effaces is the paper that was used by Sahagún's Nahuatl-speaking collaborators. I considered it like the finest parchment. It has a hard surface and is dense paper, which allowed it to be scored so that the scribes who set it down could produce an even block of texts. But it is not paper imported from Europe, as was the paper of the Florentine Codex. Rather, it was paper fabricated in Mexico from a maguey plant. Testing carried out at the Library of Congress by Mary Elizabeth Howard and Sylvia Albrow has just revealed this past October. Maguey paper is very, very rare. Of the corpus of hundreds of colonial-era native manuscripts that are made on native paper, almost all of them are made from a paper called amatl, which was derived from a tree called the Quahuamatl. This tribute manuscript from the Valley of Mexico, for instance, is made on amatl, and in the inset you can see that one of the tributes paid to the Aztecs or Mexica in the Valley of Mexico were bundles of paper. They're shown here as a square object tied with a cord. While the surviving dozen or so pre-Hispanic manuscripts, that is, made before the Spanish invasion, are mostly painted on deer hide, 4 of them from the Maya region are on paper, But this is Amatal paper, not maguey paper. Only 6 colonial-era manuscripts at the Biblioteca Nacional in Mexico, one of the largest repositories, have been identified as maguey. In the entire United States, we think there are only 4 sheets known. All of them are from the Codex Huejotzingo. 2 of these appear on the screen. Now, there's no practical reason that this book of sermons was made with maguey paper, yet its creators overcame some obstacles that it should be. If one looks carefully at the manuscript of the Sermonario, one can see that the book's creators faced a scarcity of appropriately sized paper. In the back sections of the book, but not the front, many of the pages were slightly smaller than the others, suggesting that the bookmakers were selecting the best of what they had for the beginning, and then were forced to resort to less than ideal size sheets at the back. So why did they choose maguey paper for this volume? We may never know exactly why, but I want to suggest that it may have had to do with the nature of the material itself. Maguey, or the agave plant, is best known today as the source for pulque. Here, a pulquero uses a hollow gourd to pull out fresh sap, which will be fermented into the pulque. This is called aguamiel. In the United States, we're more familiar with pulque's distilled cousins, tequila and mezcal. In pre-Hispanic Mesoamerica, however, the maguey plant was highly regarded, not only because of pulque. Another tribute book, the Codex Mendoza, reveals that maguey, seen as a place name here, was also valued because its fibers could be spun into fine cloaks. There's the place name. And here the cloaks, seen on the top of the page. Its juices could be reduced to a sweet syrup, seen here at the bottom right. We know that when the leaves of the maguey were dried, they could be burned for fuel or used as roofing for houses. The maguey plant was so valued that it was seen to be the physical manifestation of a female deity named Mayahuel. Here, on the pages of a pre-Hispanic manuscript called the Codex Borgia, she appears on one of the pages of a ritual calendar. She's on the right-hand side of the page, in front of a spiky maguey plant painted green and red. Below the plant, its root system is stylized as a giant mouth, and the split tongue that curves out from its base of the plant allows it to predate on the earth's soil. Across from Mayahuel, on the left-hand side, a man sits on a red throne, and he drinks from a black bowl filled with pulque, the beverage created from the milky sap of the plant. But between them is a vessel filled with foaming pulque. The foaming pulque appears as the white wavy band on the top of the ceramic vessel. It's decorated with paper banners and the bib-like element often applied to sacred objects. I believe that these V markers, which aren't found in all banners and bibs in the Codex, are meant to signal that this is maguey paper, that it is here used as a kind of covering or piece of clothing beyond being a surface for writing. Shows us that maguey paper had significant ritual use related to the consumption of pulque, that milky, nourishing drink coming from Mayahuel. Very little of the nature of the paper would have been perceptible to me had I access only to the digital version. Instead, I would have likely focused on what was most available in that edition, and that would have been the words on the page. But encountering the book itself, I could see quite clearly how important the paper was to its makers. We do not know why Sahagun scribes went to great lengths to get this paper, and we may never know. Perhaps they wanted to put this sacred material to the service of the evangelization project. Or perhaps they believed that any sacred charge of the paper, carried over from pre-Hispanic times, would be neutralized by the presence of words on the page. But it was seeing the object that allowed me to ask new questions about it. And of course, digital editions of books will allow me to ask different ones as well. Perhaps one day scanners will allow one to make topographical maps of all kinds of surfaces, including manuscript pages. Such topographical maps will allow us to perceive more of the physical nature of texts. Maybe digital tools will allow us to identify native papers from the region of their source plant. But for the moment, we must always keep in mind the important material features of texts that digital editions are often silent about. And I hope that we continue to think about the values that the creators of these books attributed to their creations, even with the digital edition at hand. I hope we never lose sight of the ways that the creators chose to encode information, and that the distance between our world and theirs will always serve as a call to both humility and wonder. Thank you.